I didn't realize something was wrong at first. That's the part that still bothers me. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden scream, no obvious sign that everything had shifted. It happened quietly. Too quietly. 1 second we were climbing, breathing hard, joking in short bursts because the air was thin. The next I turned around to say something to the guide, and he wasn't there. Let me back up. People love to imagine mountains as these noble, silent giants, majestic, timeless, calm. That's a lie we tell ourselves because it makes the photos look better. Mountains don't care about you. They don't warn you. They don't rush. They just wait, and if you make enough small mistakes, they let you fall apart on your own. I was part of a small group, 4 of us total, 3 hikers and 1 guide. The guide was supposed to be the constant, the anchor, the one person who knew the route so well he could walk it blind. That's what we were told. That's what we believed. I'd done hard hikes before. Not this high, not this remote, but I wasn't a beginner. I trained, I prepared, I respected the mountain, or at least I thought I did. Looking back now, I realize respect isn't just preparation, it's humility. And I was already short on that before we even started. The climb was brutal from the first day. Long stretches where conversation died because every breath mattered. The kind of silence that presses into your ears until you hear your own heartbeat. Our guide moved ahead of us, steady and efficient, never rushing, never slowing too much. He didn't talk much. At the time, I took that as confidence. Now I wonder if it was something else. On the second day, the weather shifted. Not violently, not enough to cancel the climb, but just enough to change the mood. Clouds rolled in lower. Visibility shrank. The mountain felt closer, heavier, like it was leaning toward us. That's when I first noticed something off. The guide started walking farther ahead than before. Not dangerously far, but far enough that we had to raise our voices to get his attention. I remember thinking it was odd. Guides usually stay close, especially when conditions change, but no one said anything, including me. That's a pattern you'll hear a lot in this story. No one said anything. By the time we reached the final ascent, exhaustion had stripped us down to basics. Eat, drink, step, breathe, repeat. The summit was close, close enough to taste. That kind of closeness messes with your judgment. It makes you sloppy. It makes you optimistic when you shouldn't be. We stopped briefly to adjust gear. I remember kneeling, tightening a strap, my fingers clumsy from cold and fatigue. When I stood up, I expected to see the guide a few steps ahead, waiting like he always had. Instead, there was only rock and cloud. At first, I assumed he'd moved a little higher, so I took a few steps forward, then a few more, scanned the path, looking for his silhouette. Nothing. I turned around and asked the others if they'd seen him move ahead. They shook their heads. That's when the silence changed. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was empty, the kind of quiet that feels wrong, like a room after someone storms out. I remember my stomach tightening, a slow, sinking feeling that didn't match the altitude. We called out his name. Once, then again. Our voices disappeared into the mist, swallowed without echo. That scared me more than if we'd heard something back. At least an echo would have meant the mountain was listening. I checked my watch. Only a few minutes had passed since we last saw him. He couldn't have gone far. That's what logic said. But logic starts to lose authority when you're tired and cold, and high enough that your thoughts feel delayed. We debated what to do, briefly. Tension makes conversations short. One of the others suggested we keep going to the summit. The guide was probably already there, waiting. Another thought he'd stepped off the path for some reason and would reappear any second. I didn't say it out loud, but a darker thought had already formed in my head. What if he didn't? I've replayed that moment more times than I can count. The exact second when instinct whispered that something was very wrong, and I ignored it. Not because I didn't believe it, but because believing it would have forced action. And action at that altitude costs energy you don't know if you'll get back. So we moved forward. Every step after that felt heavier, like I was dragging more than my own weight uphill. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the guide waving us on, laughing at the confusion. He never did. The summit came into view suddenly. One moment, just fog and stone. The next, the slope eased, and there it was. The top. The thing we'd been chasing for days. Normally, reaching a summit feels like victory, relief, a surge of emotion that washes away the pain of the climb. This time, it felt hollow. There was no guide, no sign of him, no footprints that made sense. Just us, standing on top of a mountain that suddenly felt far too big and far too quiet. That's when it hit me fully. We were alone. Not alone in the poetic sense. Not the romantic, spiritual kind of solitude people post about online. This was logistical aloneness, practical aloneness, the kind that gets people into trouble fast. I remember saying it out loud, almost to convince myself it was real. He's not here. No one argued. We scanned the area, calling out again, louder this time. Nothing. The wind picked up, pushing clouds past us in slow, ghostly waves. Visibility dropped even more. The summit, which should have been a momentary stop, suddenly felt like a trap. I felt anger creep in, sharp and unexpected. At him, at myself, at the situation. Guides don't just vanish. That's the unspoken rule. Whatever else happens, the guide is the constant, the professional, the one thing you're not supposed to lose. And yet, there we were. I remember thinking, this isn't how stories are supposed to go. The mountain didn't care. We had to make a decision, and fast. Staying at the summit too long wasn't safe. Conditions were worsening, and without a guide, every minute increased the risk. We discussed options, voices tight, clipped. Edged with fear we pretended was just urgency. Go back down the same route? Wait longer? Split up? That last option died immediately. Even in our state, we knew better. In the end, we chose the least bad option. Start descending slowly, following our own tracks as best we could, hoping the guide had gone down ahead of us and we'd catch up. I didn't like it. My gut screamed against it. But fear has a way of making bad plans feel reasonable. As we began the descent, something else settled in. Responsibility. Without the guide, someone had to make calls. Someone had to decide pace, brakes, direction. And without discussing it, that weight landed on me. Maybe because I was the most vocal. Maybe because I didn't freeze. Or maybe because everyone else was hoping someone would step up. I didn't feel qualified, not even close. But I stepped forward anyway. And that decision, made without ceremony, without confidence, would follow me for the rest of the climb. And long after we came off the mountain. The path down looked different from the path up. That's something no one tells you. Or maybe they do and you don't listen. Familiar terrain turns strange when you're tired, stressed, and missing a key piece of the puzzle. Every shadow looked like movement. Every sound made my heart jump. I kept expecting to see the guide ahead of us sitting casually, waiting to ask why we were so slow. Instead, all I saw were our own footprints, slowly filling with drifting snow and dust. At some point, one of the others asked the question we'd all been avoiding. What if he didn't go down? No one answered right away, because once you ask that question, you have to accept what it implies, and none of us were ready to do that yet. So we kept moving, step by step, down a mountain that suddenly felt very different than it had a few hours earlier. And somewhere between the summit and the first steep drop, I realized something that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. We weren't just trying to get down anymore. We were trying to survive a mistake that wasn't ours, but was now completely our problem. And the mountain, as always, was watching quietly. As we continued down, time started to blur. Minutes stretched, then collapsed. I stopped trusting my sense of distance entirely. Everything felt farther than it should have been. Slower, like the mountain was quietly adding weight to each step just to see how we'd react. I kept replaying the last clear image I had of the guide. His back, the way he moved, confident, economical, like someone who belonged there. That image didn't fit with what was happening now, and my brain kept trying to reconcile the two. I didn't want to believe he'd made a mistake. I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation waiting just a little farther down. But mountains don't give explanations. They give outcomes. The weather worsened gradually, which somehow made it more unnerving. No sudden storm, no dramatic warning. Just colder air, thicker clouds, wind that cut through layers like they were suggestions instead of protection. I remember thinking how unfair that felt. If something bad was going to happen, shouldn't it at least announce itself properly? We slowed our pace, not by choice, but because our bodies demanded it. I called for breaks more often than I would have liked. Every time we stopped, silence wrapped around us again, heavy and watchful. During one of those pauses, I noticed my hands shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline that had nowhere to go. One of the others asked me quietly if I thought we should turn back up to look for the guide. I didn't answer right away. That was one of the hardest moments for me, because leadership isn't about knowing the right answer. It's about choosing an answer when none of them feel right. Going back up meant climbing into worse conditions, burning energy we might not get back. Going down meant accepting that we were leaving him behind, at least for now. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded steadier than I felt. We keep going down. If we stop moving, we lose more than time. No one argued. That scared me more than disagreement would have. It meant they were already relying on me, and I wasn't sure I deserved that trust. As we descended further, the terrain grew more technical. Narrow sections, loose rock, places where one wrong step could mean a long slide before you managed to stop yourself. I forced myself to slow everyone down, even when impatience flickered in their eyes. Fear makes people rush. I'd seen that before. I wasn't going to let it happen here. At one point, we found something that made all of us freeze. A footprint, not ours. It was partially filled in by drifting snow, but the shape was unmistakable. Same boot pattern the guide wore. Fresh enough to matter, old enough to be dangerous. I crouched down, tracing the edge of it with my glove. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "He came this way," someone said. The problem was, the footprint didn't lead cleanly back to the main path. It angled off slightly toward a section of terrain that dropped away faster than I liked. That's when the anger came back, hotter this time. Why would he do that? Guides are supposed to avoid shortcuts. They're supposed to stick to known routes, especially near the summit, especially when visibility is poor. This wasn't confidence. This was risk, or desperation. I stood up and scanned the slope below, squinting into the fog. I wanted to see something, anything that would tell me what had happened next. There was nothing. Following the footprint would mean committing to terrain we hadn't planned for. Ignoring it felt wrong on a different level, like walking away from a question you might never get to ask again. I took a breath, then another. "We don't follow it," I said finally. "Not now. We mark the spot mentally. We get down safely. Then we report everything." Saying it out loud made it real. It also made me feel like a terrible person. We continued down. As daylight began to fade, panic tried to creep in again. Darkness changes everything. Distances shrink. Sounds grow louder. Every decision feels heavier. I pushed us harder than I probably should have, trying to reach a safer elevation before night fully settled in. When we finally reached a spot sheltered enough to rest properly, the relief was physical. I felt it in my knees, my shoulders, my jaw. We sat in silence for a while, chewing through food that tasted like cardboard because none of us had the energy to care. That's when one of the others broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. A few words spoken into the darkness. He wasn't supposed to leave us. No one corrected him, because he was right. That night was long, longer than any night has a right to be. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by cold, by wind, by thoughts I couldn't shut off. I kept imagining scenarios, harmless ones at first, then darker possibilities that I tried to shove away. When morning finally came, it felt undeserved, like we'd been granted something we hadn't earned yet. The rest of the descent was slow but steady. By the time we reached lower ground and reconnected with a clearer route, exhaustion had flattened everything. Fear, anger, relief, all of it blurred together into a single dull ache. Eventually, we reached help. The moment I tried to explain what had happened, my voice failed me. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I suddenly understood how strange the story sounded. A guide vanishing near the summit, a group continuing without him, decisions made under pressure that would look questionable from the outside. They listened carefully, asked questions, took notes. Search efforts began soon after. I won't go into details about that part. Not because it's secret, but because it's not really my story to tell anymore. What matters is what stayed with me. People asked later if I felt lucky. I didn't know how to answer. Luck implies randomness. This didn't feel random. It felt like a chain of small choices, some ours, some not, that lined up in just the wrong way. No single dramatic failure, just subtle ones that accumulated quietly until someone disappeared. I still think about the guide, about what he might have been thinking in those last moments when he chose that direction. Confidence, fatigue, a split-second misjudgment? I'll never know. What I do know is this: the summit isn't the goal. It never was. Getting down is. And the stories we tell about mountains, the ones filled with triumph and clean endings, leave out the parts where things don't resolve neatly. Sometimes you come back without answers. Sometimes survival doesn't feel like victory. It feels like responsibility you didn't ask for and can't quite set down afterward. When I think back to standing on that summit, alone with no guide in sight, I don't remember fear first. I remember disappointment. Because that was the moment I understood something fundamental. No matter how prepared you think you are, no matter who you trust, there will be moments when the structure disappears, and you're left holding decisions you never trained for. And you either move forward with them, or you don't come back at all. Thank you for staying with me through this story and listening until the end. I truly appreciate you taking the time to hear what happened and what it changed in me. If this story made you think, or if you know someone who's drawn to places where comfort disappears and character is tested, consider sharing this video with them. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, told honestly, without shortcuts.